We came down the hall from our rooms, and I had already abandoned the morning I had set aside for her to the intrusion waiting below. The timing was poor, not even 24 hours had passed, and already they were at her with their questions. It was the manner of it that gave offence. One did not arrive without warning, and certainly not so soon, not before the house had had any chance to settle around her. By any measure, it was poor form. "Answer only as you are comfortable with," I said. I offered her my arm at the stairs, and the coldness of her fingers told me more than I cared for about the effect this already had on her. It did little to improve my view of how it had been carried out. I wouldn't have had them through the doors at all had the decision been mine. If you would prefer not to answer, you may leave it to me. We reached the study doors, and I paused there, bringing her hand to my mouth and allowing her that moment to brace for what was to come. "Are you ready?" She let out a breath that stirred her hair out of place, nodding at me as I set it right again. I opened the door and stepped inside first, and the two intelligence officers rose from their chairs. I didn't move aside straight away, not until it was clear enough who would speak for Grace, and only then did I step back and let her pass. "Captain Ashcombe," the elder of the two said, extending his hand to me as he stepped forward. "We appreciate your time." I took his hand, then the others. It was a small discourtesy, perhaps, but not one I was inclined to excuse in a man who should have known better. "You might have rung the house first. We do have plans this morning." The younger officer, dressed more for leisure than for official duty, and with little regard for where he found himself, gave a shrug. "My apologies for the intrusion, Captain. We shan't keep you long." I turned away enough to bring Grace forward to greet them. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Lady Grace Rowen." They lowered their heads to her as I brought her forward, which at least showed they had some understanding of the weight of the moment. "Lady Grace," the younger said. Edmund rocked back in his chair, one hand gesturing towards the men. "Gracie, darling, these gentlemen have come to speak with you about your time in the colonies," he said. "And of course Blackmere answers when the Crown calls." I saw her to the settee and took my place beside her as my father came in through the door, and Edmund, pouring himself a glass from the decanter, announced him. "Officers, this is Blackmere's counsel, Viscount Ashcombe." Father didn't trouble himself with introductions, but went straight to the chair by the fireplace and took it, and from his expression I knew he found their presence as ill-timed as I did. "Do carry on," he said, and straightened his coat. The older man with the gold insignia on his tie, placed with a care that suggested it mattered to him that it be seen, spoke first. "Nothing formal, I assure you. We would only like your account as you remember it." He paused, just long enough to let the other officer set his recorder on the coffee table separating us. "The other survivors have not adjusted as well as we might have hoped. We've found it useful to understand their experiences where possible." I caught the tremor of Grace's hands at the edge of my sight when she said, "Of course, any way I can help," and turned towards her more. Because her hands had never been able to hide from me, the stress her upbringing taught her to hide elsewhere. "Where would you like me to begin?" The senior officer clicked his pen and settled his attention on her. "Mr. Wentworth's report gave us the general outline of the ambush," he said. "It is what came after that concerns us now, unpleasant though it may be." She looked first to the Earl, and I understood where her account would start and why she hesitated to give it voice, though Edmund spared her the need for discretion and nodded for her to go on. She drew a breath, and her eyes went to her hands as she began. "Once they separated us children from the others, they took them to the bridge." Her eyes closed then, and I understood it was as much to find the memory as it was to shut it out. They pushed the older children over the side first, then the women, then the men. Their reverend told them it was more humane that way. Though she gave a small shrug as if it were nothing, there was nothing in it that sat easily with me. With every word she set before them, I felt the heat of it rise in my blood. I knew I would carry the memory of what had been done to her long after the telling was finished, and curse the souls of those rebel bastards to the end of my days. I suppose I was in shock, but it seemed to happen in a blur after that, so pardon my lack of detail. I only recall that they put me in a cell. She glanced at me and said, "The one they use for the horses now, across from the courthouse." What passed for a jail rose at once in my mind. Little more than a stone barn fitted with bars and nothing else. No water, no warmth, no privacy, no consideration given to the girl who dwelled inside it. I shifted where I sat and set my hand against my chin, if only to keep the temper of it from showing. When I nodded, her eyes went again to her hands. They put the others on a train, and I never heard of them again. Looking up from his notes, the older one said, "We understand there was a good deal of mistreatment. If you are able, begin from when you were first confined. Were you abused straight away?" "No," she said, and then, almost as quickly, "So sorry. I mean, yes." It didn't escape me how the first answer came without thought, nor how it had been corrected with the same ease, and I sensed the depth of what must have been done to her, that she should have believed it otherwise, even for a moment. Once I was chained to the wall, one of them struck my face with his fist and knocked me to the ground. I remember my head hurting so much I could not see straight, and being very confused why he did so, because I gave them no struggle. I shut my eyes for a moment and set my teeth, if only to contain it. There was nothing to be gained in showing how it sickened me, not to her and not for something that couldn't be undone. "How long were you held there?" he asked as he flipped through his book. A quiet hum escaped her as she searched the air for the right answer and shook her head, and the horrid sound of it set an ache in me I could neither make use of nor be rid of. "They would not let me sleep, so I cannot be certain of the time. A week, I think. The hangings were after church, and when they let me out, they had come from church again. There was a particular kind of depravity in it all. That such things should be done at all was one matter, but to do them on the Lord's Day placed it beyond even the pretense of righteousness. I only know the bodies outside my window had fallen from the bridge by then, so however long that takes, I suppose." My father shifted forward in his chair, his hands coming together between his knees as she spoke, for I knew the rage was building in him as well. Edmund reached again for his glass, though I could have sworn I heard the catch in his breath. There was little wonder why it was so. The grief for George and Margaret had long since been borne and put to rest, but what sat before us now was something else entirely. No woman should ever have been made to endure such misery, nor any enemy worth the name besides. The other officer didn't allow the quiet or shock to linger for long. "And the material they used in their propaganda," he said. "Do you recall it? Any information you have is invaluable, as the others have no memory of it at all. They played films and recordings without cease, and—" The rest did not come as easily for Grace. A slight gloss to her eyes as tears gathered, her lips pressing together to master it. I took her hand then and held it, a quiet steadiness between us, so that she might know I heard it and would see it through with her. She drew a breath, and after a brief clearing of her throat, went on. Always the same message. My country did not want me. My family had no wish to see me returned, that I had been abandoned by my king and country, and forgotten. Her grip tightened on mine, her attention shifting to her grandfather as she brought herself back under control. "They gave me another name," she said and smiled at him, a faint shake of her head following. "But I would not answer to it. Grace Annabel Rowen, I told them, no matter how they punished me, until at last they stopped trying." Edmund's hands clasped before his mouth as he leaned forward at the desk, his eyes closing. And though he mastered it, there was no mistaking the tears coming down his face. The quiet tap of pen to paper marked the older man's attention, returning us to the matter at hand. "Do you remember when your memories of home ceased, or did they diminish more gradually?" "It was gradual," she said, quite relieved to have the subject changed by the sound of it. "Like a dream that fades the longer you are awake. until all I could remember clearly was my name and a road sign for Sussex. Then she looked at me, a trace of the spirited girl I loved so much in her smile again. Though I knew the moment Christian stepped into my shop that we belonged to each other somehow, it all seemed to come back to me so easily after that. A look passed between the two men, and after a moment, the older gave a nod, as though some matter had been settled that we weren't privy to. "Thank you, Miss Rowen. This is the most complete accounting we have yet been able to obtain of those events." A brief pause as his finger left his pen to point at her. "More than that, you have endured what has undone men trained to withstand such things. It is no small accomplishment that you have come through it as you have, and I hope you are quite proud of that." A long breath left her, and with it some measure of the strain she had been holding, her grip on mine loosening as the warmth returned to her hand. "I thank you for saying so." Father rose as they did, already moving to take charge of it. "If you will," he said, and led them towards the door. It wasn't something I would have made open display of, but no one had more pride about Grace than I, not only for what she survived, though that alone would have been enough, but for the manner in which she came through it, refusing to let it diminish her as the others had. The officer had not been wrong. She had a steadiness about her that would have seen her stand with any man the Crown might set to such work, and she was mine. Had we been alone, I wouldn't have been so restrained in expressing how proud she made me, but her grandfather's presence saw it otherwise, and so I set a hand to her face and drew her slightly towards me instead to kiss her forehead. "Well done, my darling.